Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Making Monsters. I'm Taylor Doyle, and we are continuing on the new coaches, getting to know the new coaches for the Chicago Bears. It's a fun time right now because a lot of people have been asking for changes for a while. I'm joined today by Ross Jackson. He's the host, all sorts of Saints stuff. We'll start with host on Locked On. He's the host for Locked On Saints, a Saints beat writer for LAsports.net, Saints analyst on WWL TV. So all sorts of Saints information we can get out of this with Ross. We were just talking off air a little bit, which is fitting. There's a lot of Saints ties right now between New Orleans and Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of that comes from the connectivity between New Orleans to Detroit. I almost said like city name redacted just so that I didn't reference them specifically. But yeah, so with Ben Johnson coming over from that side, that's where you see a lot of these connections come through. There was a little bit of a New Orleans North that was going on with Dan Campbell's staff, and good on Ben Johnson. Now he gets his opportunity, the long-awaited opportunity, and he's able to make the most of it by bringing over some buddies. I love it.
Yeah, that's Ben Johnson's definitely the name that I think we're most excited about. It's the name people are most familiar with also in Chicago. So that helps because that's who we've faced against the Detroit Lions the last few years. And he's embarrassed us several times when it comes to things he's been able to do on the field. So that is something exciting. But to your point, it's funny because we kind of have this like pipeline to Atlanta, like a lot of our former players, coaches, GMs, whatever it may be, go to Atlanta, and then the Saints guys come to Chicago. So it's like this weird little triangle. But we'll go through real quick the ones that have been named official. Ben Johnson, we said that one. Assistant head coach / wide receiver coach is Antoine Randall L., who we also got from Detroit. Offensive coordinator Declan Doyle. We will talk a little bit about that one. You said you are familiar with Declan. He was with New Orleans for a little bit. Passing game coordinator Press Taylor, coming from Jacksonville. I'm not personally the biggest fan of Press Taylor because I also cover the Jaguars, so that's a different story.
Sure.
Quarterbacks coach JT Barrett, who played for the Saints, or I guess was on the Saints for a little bit. So that's another tie. Then Dennis Allen. That's why we're mainly here today, Ross. And so we'll get into a lot of him. Bill Johnson, a defensive line coach, was also with the Saints for a little bit. He was a big name, and they tie a lot of ties to Aaron Donald and his development and his time with the Rams. He also coached for the Falcons too. So that's another name. And then Al Harris, who's been with the Cowboys, is the defensive passing game coordinator. So those are the names so far locked in. We're waiting for that offensive line name. And that is one that I think a lot of people are interested in because the offensive line has been one of the bigger struggles when it comes to Chicago development, when it comes to areas of concern every single year. So we're still waiting for that one, and we'll see.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned, let's start with Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen is probably the more recognizable name outside of Ben Johnson for Bears fans, just because he's been in the league a long time. He's been a head coach. He's been a defensive coordinator. He's been a defensive play caller. He has all of these ties. So just to go through that real quick, he was with the Falcons before coming to the Saints. He was the assistant D-line coach from 06 to 07 in New Orleans, secondary coach in 08 to 10, moved around a little bit, Broncos, Raiders. After that, came back, was a defensive assistant with the Saints in 15, came defensive coordinator 15 to 2021, and then obviously moved up to the head coach until this last year. So let's start with that. His kind of build up through the Saints organization. It's to me, a positive light seeing somebody who has been with the defensive line, who's been with the secondary, who has been kind of all over the defense in a lot of different aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that he does incredibly well is that he develops secondary talent incredibly well. And his game plan is all about the symbiotic relationship between rush and coverage. So both of his specialties, I would certainly consider the coverage part, the defensive backs more so his specialty. Dennis Allen's the kind of guy to where you can draft him a first round cornerback, you can draft him a fifth round cornerback, you can draft him an undrafted free agent, and by the second year of each of those three guys' careers, they're all ready to be starters on a defense. Like he's that good when it comes to developing. And we've seen that over and over again here in New Orleans. It's probably the kind of Midas touch that he has for certain. And then you saw kind of the meteoric rise that he had in terms of going over to Las Vegas, or I guess it was Oakland at the time, and becoming a head coach. And the Saints were super excited to have him back. They effectively brought him back to New Orleans to be a defensive coordinator in waiting. You'll notice he came back in 2015 as one position and then quickly moved into that defensive coordinator position in there. So just a bit of a testament to what it is that he does and the experience that he brings.
Yeah, to that point, I was looking at some of the Saints drafts during the time that he was there, and it is a lot of names. It's a CJ Gardner-Johnson, who obviously we know is one of the better in the league. He's a little frustrating because he knows how to push players' buttons, and he gets he's had several Bears players punch him during games. But Lattimore is another name. Trey Hendrickson. I think people forget that the Saints drafted Trey Hendrickson, but he's fantastic. I think what the lineup here is almost feels like they're really good at developing and drafting these guys, but for some reason they don't keep them. So that's an interesting.
Right.
And I'm sure that's a whole different storyline for you guys. But Alontae Taylor now, Kool-Aid McKinstry is another name. So those are, to your point, a lot of secondary guys. And I would say that one of my favorite part of the Chicago Bears is our secondary, to be honest. Jalen Johnson, love Jalen Johnson. I love Jaquan Brisker. I love Kyler Gordon. I think is going to be one of the better nickel corners in the league. And that's one of the first things that Dennis Allen said. So to your point, when it comes to that, the importance of having that both outside corners, the importance of having that nickel corner, how does that play into what he does defensively?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, he is a 4-2-5 defense, right? So 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, 5 defensive backs. You'll see some base sets or 3 linebacker sets throughout his time and obvious rundowns and things like that. But you're going to see the slot corner heavily emphasized in his scheme, whether that's in the run game, whether that's as a pass rusher off the edge as well, especially on third downs, and then of course in coverage. So that nickel corner spot is big for what it is that Dennis Allen likes to do over on the defensive side. He'll roll light because he likes having corners that can tackle. So he'll feel comfortable having those 3 corners out there in situations where maybe other defenses wouldn't. And then with 2 big, bullish and skilled safeties that he'll continue to build over, but starting with Jaquan Brisker, a guy that Dennis Allen and the New Orleans Saints were interested in. I think he actually went just a few picks before Alontae Taylor a few years ago. Maybe it was 1 pick, actually. Might have been right before. Yeah. They loved Jaquan during the draft process. And so now he gets an opportunity to work with him. And look, Jalen Johnson's been one of my favorite corners in the NFL since he came into the league out of Utah. And he is should be taking a pretty massive step with Dennis Allen now in his corner.
Because this was some of the things, and we know Jalen Johnson, what he's able to do. I do think that the Eberflus defense was a little different. They played not a ton of man. It was a lot of zone stuff. It was a lot of kind of sit back and wait defense that you saw, which we got frustrated with. This is what led to the Washington Hail Mary, was you let a Terry McLaurin and go get the 12-yard that gets them into the distance to Jaden Daniels to be able to make that throw. And so that is what would frustrate Bears fans when it came to Eberflus, is once they got to the red zone, you were confident that they'd be able to stop them, but teams would just drive up the field until they got to that point. And I feel like Dennis Allen's defenses are way more aggressive than that.
Yeah, he brings in a very kind of attacking approach. That's always the word that players use. Like when the Saints signed linebacker Willie Gay Jr. from the Kansas City Chiefs this past offseason, I asked him what it was that he liked about this defense, and he talked about the attacking nature of it and all that. And so that's a big part of it is how aggressive that defense can be, especially on third downs. You'll see a lot of what are called Okie fronts. So 3 defensive linemen, 2 safeties over on each edge, 1 on each edge, and then 2 linebackers sugar on each side of the A gap. So it's 7 on the line, some drop back, some rush, all rush. There's a whole lot that goes on there. And so you'll see that a lot on third downs. You'll see a little bit of bend, don't break, especially early in games. We used to call them kind of colloquially the diagnosis drives, to where they kind of sit back on defense and go, okay, what is the offense doing? And then they adjust to that. So if you start seeing some drives early on in games where it just looks super easy for a team to drive down the field and get a field goal or something like that, don't get too concerned about the defense right away. Wait to see how they respond to it the second and third drives, because a lot of it is just trying to figure out what it is that they're doing. And then lastly, for the Jalen Johnson piece, it's a press man system. It is a system that wants to take the corners, put them on islands, give them some help over the top with the safeties, but they like to be multiple with the safeties. They like to be interchangeable with the safeties. One drops back to a middle of the field zone, one rushes, or one drops down to a robber, the other splits. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of stuff that you'll see those safeties be asked to do. And a part of the comfort behind that is when Dennis Allen can have those perimeter corners that can be left out on an island. And I think Jalen Johnson's a perfect fit for that. And I think you're going to see Jalen Johnson probably love the system, because he's going to be trusted a lot to do what it is that he knows that he'll do extremely well.
Yeah, that gets me very excited. I love, like I said, I'm very high. The secondary is probably one of the things I'm more confident when it comes to Chicago. And you saw that in the first half of the year. Things kind of fell apart a little bit late when number one, Brisker unfortunately got a concussion and wasn't able to come back this season. We're hoping, from what it sounds like, he's healthy and he'll be good to go next year. Good. But they signed Kevin Byard in the offseason last year, which was huge because they did, to your point, they did kind of play similar when it wasn't like a true free or strong safety. It was more of like a free flowing where you want them on the field, which I think works so well for Kevin Byard and Brisker. And I don't know how closely you were able to watch them last year, but when Brisker was healthy, those two together it was really, really fun to watch.
Really nice. Yeah, it was really, really nice because I watched a little bit of it because there's a world in which that exact safety tandem is in New Orleans, to where like if Brisker gets drafted and then if the Saints sign Byard in free agency, instead of taking the look at, the hometown guy and stuff like that they ended up bringing in and Tyrann Mathieu and all, it would have probably sent them in that direction at a point. And so there's a world in which that safety tandem was going to be a thing here in New Orleans. And so when I saw that that's what was going to happen in Chicago, I was like, oh, that's pretty dope. Like, let me go and watch. And so it was cool to see. But yeah, that sort of multiple nature of being able to kind of take advantage of safeties in disguise pre-snap. So you'll have them, looking like a middle of the field open kind of coverage, a cover 2 or a cover 4. And then at the snap, one will roll down, one will roll up. They'll both drop back. One takes a quarter, they just do a lot of different things pre and post snap. And the safeties are a big reason why Dennis Allen's able to do that. So the disguise becomes really important with that position in particular.
And I love that. And you mentioned using that slot corner as also some pass rush, which is something we've also seen. We've seen Kyler Gordon be able to do that. We've also seen, which is funny, going back to Jaquan Brisker's rookie season, he was our leading sack getter in the rookie season. That's just how much they actually sent him after the quarterback and how much of a ball hawk he is. And I always say that, like, you think of it, that ball hawk mentality as the guys who just kind of go after the receivers or maybe the running backs and get the balls out that way. Brisker, wherever the ball is, he's finding it. And that's why I love the type of player he is. And I think he does fit that aggressive mentality for Dennis Allen when you're talking about up front, because I'm guessing this is probably why they brought in somebody like Bill Johnson, who does have that more like guru label with the defensive line. Because if Dennis Allen is that secondary guy, kind of meshing these two guys together, because the defensive line is probably one of the weaknesses. Part of that is they just don't have another true pass rusher outside of Montez Sweat. I'm guessing, hoping that will be addressed this next offseason, the season coming up. How important is that in his defenses when it comes to just creating that pass rush, and especially in the interior?
Yeah, the interior in particular is really, really important. So Dennis Allen's best years as a defensive coordinator are really the best, because it really kind of arced over to when he was a head coach as well. So let's say Dennis Allen's best years when he was kind of the defensive architect, right? Defensive play caller, was when Ryan Nielsen was his defensive lineman. Now you're familiar with Ryan Nielsen with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And so when he was a defensive line coach, that's when this defense was at its absolute best. And so having a strong defensive line coach is really, really important for a Dennis Allen system. The reason why is because Dennis Allen's scheme looks for edge setters more than it looks for pass rushers. So it's a little bit of a different type of scheme. You're looking at, a love for big body defensive linemen, 6'5" and above, 270 pounds and above, not necessarily a system that supports speed rushers. It's one of the reasons why you saw Zach Bond leave in free agency. He went to Vic Fangio's defense in Philly because that was a defense that fit him in New Orleans. He wasn't going to get those types of pass rushing snaps. And so expect to see a little bit more of a bigger, bolstered kind of speed to power conversion approach to pass rush that's getting to the quarterback on the second and third efforts, because the coverage is taking away the first, second, and third reads more than you're seeing guys get to the quarterback in 2.5 to 3 seconds. The reason why the interior becomes really important is because you need somebody in the interior in Dennis Allen's defense that's going to change the numbers. That's going to take up 2 bodies on the offensive line, 3 bodies on the offensive line, create opportunities one-on-one over on the edges so that they can get through without it being a coverage sack and actually get to the quarterback. So that disruption on the interior becomes really important for the other pass rushers, as well as, of course, for the run game. So that's where having a strong defensive line coach and having a talented set of defensive linemen, particularly bolstering that talent in the interior, is important for that Dennis Allen system.
Which is interesting, connecting that to the Bears personnel. I'm a huge fan of Javon Dexter. It was a pick I liked from the start, and you've really seen him develop. Andrew Billings, I think, is also fantastic and underrated. He our run game, I mean, our run defense completely died when he got hurt last season. And that's when you can tell how important he is. But I do think that's another position they'll also address. Is a Mason Graham in that type of world? Yes. Okay.
Perfect. Okay. Perfect. Him and Dexter. Him and Dexter. That was another big one that I looked at. Javon Dexter, where he was coming out of Florida, and I was like, that's the perfect Dennis Allen interior defensive lineman. So it's another one of those guys that he didn't get here in New Orleans that he'll get there in Chicago. That makes perfect sense. And then Mason Graham, like just. Yeah. I mean,
if somehow he's there at
that, man. If he makes it, that's perfect. That's perfect.
So to your point, though, if that's the case, then maybe they don't have to go extremely heavy on some true star pass rusher. They don't have to go spend somebody to go opposite Montez Sweat, is what you're saying, because they do have a Darrell Taylor who came in last year and actually played pretty well. And if they have those guys in the middle, they'll be able to succeed in this type of defense because of that combination of what works.
Yeah, if I'm thinking about the perfect Dennis Allen mold in this upcoming draft when it comes to defensive line, I'd probably highlight Texas A&M pass rusher Shamar Stewart, who like is a little bit of a project, has to be developed a little bit, but is 6'5", 280 pounds, and can kind of bull rush and do all these other pieces. But he's only had 1.5 sacks in each of his 3 seasons in college, so it's not the big star pass rusher, but it's the guy that you can see has all the tools, has all the traits. That's a perfect example of a Dennis Allen edge rusher, is somebody that has the tools, has the size, has the traits, maybe doesn't have the production, but he doesn't care because he feels that they can get the production out of him. So again, the development from that defensive line coach becomes really important in that situation.
Yeah, which I mean, honestly, to me so far, it does feel like what Ben Johnson is building he's getting guys specifically that he knows. Number one, players that are already on the Bears are going to fit the type of things they do, which I think is positive, because I think one of the things that we saw with Detroit as they've been building this last 3, 4, 5 years is they really didn't have a lot of that stuff. So they've drafted really well and they've went to free agency and they've hit on almost everything they've been able to do, but they had to specifically build these formulas and pieces. And I do think that maybe Ben Johnson, part of the reason he might have picked Chicago is because it does feel like they at least have a base foundation for what he can build up.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. And that's a good way to build a team too. Yeah. I mean, surprise, surprise, Ben Johnson's got good ideas,
Yeah,
I mean, that's the type of situation. And so, that's a good situation to build on. And it's a great situation for Dennis Allen. The other thing I will warn about when it comes to the perception of Dennis Allen is don't take his head coach struggles here in New Orleans to be representative of his contributions as a defensive coordinator. It's real different when you're a defensive coordinator that's focused on your defense and when you're a head coach that's having to do all the meetings, having to have the more holistic approach to your entire team, to your organization, and also be a defensive play caller, defensive schematic, doing all those things. You have to sacrifice something. Sometimes some head coaches that are calling plays on defense, they're sacrificing being in defensive meetings so that they can go to the things they have to go to as a head coach, or vice versa. And so I warn not to pick up the struggles from his head coach years as representative of what he'll bring as a defensive coordinator. Probably sounds very familiar with having the Eberflus situation there. Like, it's very much that fantastic coordinator just couldn't hack it as a head coach.
And I was just about to say that. I think it's easy for people to jump when they see a bad experience from somebody and to not be able to separate the fact that some of these guys are really, really good coordinators. And then when they're asked to do it all, we know Eberflus issues were a lot of timeout, time management, in-game decisions. It wasn't anything he created in the scheme he kind of developed there in Chicago. And to the point of Dennis Allen, I was going to ask that because I know a lot of people, that'll be one of their first questions is like, what went wrong as a head coach? And to your point, you're being asked to do a lot of things. So I know some of the stuff I was reading this last year where some of the defensive players were struggling, like missing tackles. It was more missed tackles than normally happened. And to me, that is something because he did have a million other things he was looking at. So maybe some of those position coaches weren't doing their job in that area. Is that something that you would say was happening?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We never really figured out the catalyst for the missing tackles situation. It's still this big mystery. But yeah, no, it was a massive issue. And it was one of those things where it was like every press conference, it was, well, we got to get better at tackling. We got to get better at tackling. We got to get better at tackling. It was like, okay, when are you going to get better at tackling? You can't just keep saying it. You know what I mean? And so I think that that was a big thing when it came to to Dennis Allen's tenure is that as a head coach, it was a lot of word, not a lot of act. And so as a defensive coordinator, he doesn't have to do the word part. All he has to do is focus on the act part. He doesn't have to talk as much. He gets one coordinator availability a week. He doesn't have to deal with all that kind of stuff. All he has to focus on now is his internal message, which I think is going to be a lot easier for him. The other thing that kind of went sideways for him here in New Orleans is that he took a wrong turn at the end of last season. The kneel down that turned into the touchdown heard around the world by Jamal Williams up against the Atlanta Falcons, a rushing touchdown out of victory formation late in the game at the goal line, when the game was already out of hand and all this other stuff. And that happened. And after the fact, Dennis Allen goes up on the podium and apologizes to the Atlanta Falcons for scoring another touchdown, when any other coach in the NFL would have said, well, if you don't like it, then stop us. You know what I mean? And then go and chew the team out later behind closed doors, but that was a moment where he had a real opportunity. He didn't know it, but for whatever the time was between the touchdown was scored and his press conference, he was a hero in New Orleans doing that to the Atlanta Falcons. Like he had finally won over the city. And then he comes out and he apologizes. And not only did he lose the fan base in that moment, but he lost some respect from the players in that moment, because the players are sitting there going like, yo, wait, don't call us out publicly. Like, have our back and then come and chew us out behind closed doors. Like, that's fine. Like, we'll take that. But that was a big thing. And so that started to create a little bit of the downturn for Dennis Allen. That's something he doesn't have to worry about now. All he's got to worry about is coaching his defense to do what it is that his defense does. And he'll earn the respect of those players because he will be putting them in positive situations. But that decision, when he had to be on the bigger stage, the biggest stage as a head coach, that was a big kind of downturn for him. And that's when he kind of started to lose the locker room. And then that permeated into 2024.
Yeah, we saw very, very similar here in Chicago. It was a lot of things. You heard the rumors. I'm sure you saw too. Jalen Johnson flipped out on him in the locker room because that's a very, very similar thing kind of happened. Like, you defend us, like you're our coach, yell at us later, defend us in public type of thing. Do you think that the head coaches, because when we go back to the season, do you think the defensive head coaches sometimes are judged maybe a little unfairly? Because when you look at it, it was Dennis Allen, Matt Eberflus, and Robert Saleh who were like the first coaches fired of this season. And all of them, I mean, we talk about the Saints, and Derek Carr started really hot, but things kind of fell apart. Aaron Rodgers wasn't playing to the level that he needed. And then you had a rookie and Caleb Williams and an offensive coordinator and Shane Waldron that didn't work out. But yet they were all three fired first.
Yeah, right. Well, the Shane Waldron hire is still the biggest that was such a, we were like, what are they doing? Because he was up for it here too when the Saints hired Clint Kubiak, which of course Clint Kubiak turned into a one and done, but that's because the coaching staff turned over or anything else. But it was just like, don't hire him. Like, don't do that. Yeah. I think that there is a little bit of unfairness there. And I think the way that you're starting to see the NFL respond to it is like, look at the playoffs this past year, right? The CEO coach now is what the defensive coaches are turning into, right? Dan Quinn goes from being a defensive mastermind to being like, I ain't calling plays. I'm not, y'all can have that. I'm gonna just be here to lead. You see Sean McDermott doing the same thing, right? So I think that's the way that you're going to start seeing some of these maybe defensive head coach candidates probably market themselves, right? Like here in New Orleans, like the expectation is that Kellen Moore is going to become the head coach. We'll see what happens. But one of the guys that was up for it was Anthony Weaver. If I'm Anthony Weaver, a defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins, I'm saying, look, I'm a CEO head coach when I become a head coach. I ain't calling plays. I get somebody else to come and do it. I'm not doing all that kind of stuff. So that might be the way that you end up seeing kind of the NFL trends shape and respond to the kind of lack of fairness and sometimes too lack of production from the lack of results, from the defensive head coaches. And now you're starting to see a lot of success for the CEO coach. And so we'll see which way that ends up taking things.
Yeah, it is funny. And it honestly just sprung on me because I was like, those are the first three guys that were all fired this season. And all three got defensive coordinator jobs pretty quickly too. In
right. Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
So it kind of shows where the mindset is. Like, we know you're good at this, but maybe you couldn't do it all, which I personally would not want to be a head coach of an NFL team. So I don't get it. But I mean, I do get
with you on that. Yeah, I get it, but I'm not going to get it. You know what I mean?
No, nothing. So let's talk a little bit about, we were talking in the before we started on air of today of just talking about some of these other guys, because Declan Doyle was a name. And I mentioned this. I was like, I don't know how familiar you are with this name, but you said you are familiar with Declan. So let's talk a little bit about him, because I think this was the most shocking hire for Bears fans, because I don't think anybody really knew who they were. Obviously, Chris Doyle. Some people posted some stuff about his dad. Don't associate a person, first of all, with their father. I immediately was like, I hope people do not judge me on like what my mom and dad did, because I'm not sure how well that would go. But I think with the Broncos last, his tight end coach with Broncos, I think is what his most recent was. But tell us a little bit about what you do know of Declan Doyle.
Yeah. So Declan was hired here in New Orleans by Sean Payton 2019. So he was hired as the offensive assistant to come in and replace now Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator Joe Brady, who went on and, won a national championship with the LSU Tigers that year, all those other things. And so Declan was around for a couple of years. And then when Sean Payton got his job over in Denver, no surprise to anybody, there were a few coaches that we knew were going to head over that way. Zach Strief being one of them, the former offensive lineman. Declan Doyle ended up heading over to coach the tight ends. And then I won't say the name, but there was another name that we were very surprised not to see go that ended up being blocked. But so there's that piece. But when it comes down to Declan, the thing that I think Ben Johnson is doing here that has a lot of value is that he learned the importance of culture from a team or in a team working with Dan Campbell, right?
Yeah.
Dan Campbell's all culture all the time. That's what everything's about. You can be as good as you want to be at football, but if you don't fit the culture, you're not in here. If you do fit the culture, you can stand beside us. And Declan Doyle is going to be the glue personality-wise and culture-wise for that offense. Dennis Allen will take care of his defense. But what Declan Doyle comes in to do, because I assume Ben Johnson's not giving up play calling anytime soon, nor should he.
That's what when even people were talking about Press Taylor, I was like, Press Taylor's going to be nowhere near the plays, by the way, guys. Like, don't worry.
Right. Nowhere near any of that. And so having a guy like Declan come in at 28 years old is going to be awesome for him in terms of his future and trajectory and stuff like that. And he absolutely deserves it. You're right. Don't connect him and his father and the things that happen with that. But Declan is one of those dudes where like when he gets the coaches or when he gets the players, everyone's going to love him. He's going to relate to everybody. He's going to have something in common with every single person on that offense, every single person in that locker room. I think that's a big part of what he's going to be there to do. Since he's not calling plays, he's also a really good offensive mind. And so if he's doing the scripting for practices or if he's drawing up, if he's doing the play drawing or anything like that, like that's where he'll also contribute. But that's all the behind the scenes stuff. What you're going to see as a fan, if you're watching the game, is you're going to see, or not you, but the viewers, the listeners, when you're watching this game, what you're going to see is his ability to connect with that roster. And I'm sure you'll hear about it quite a bit in his weekly availabilities too. But that's the thing that he brings is the connective tissue, the culture. He's going to be great for that.
I do think and we heard both Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence covering both teams. Both of them said this offseason that they would prefer a young offensive mind head coach. I completely get it. And to your point, like you're going to, obviously these kids are 22, 23. I say kids because I'm 34, but they're
I'm with you.
Yeah. Like when I heard 28, I was like, that's insane. But when you're obviously going to connect a little bit more on a different level than somebody who's in their late 50s and 60s. So I understand them maybe wanting somebody like that. I also do think it's good to bring somebody in like a Dennis Allen who does have this experience in the league and maybe a little bit more experience in the hard-nosed side of football, because we know that it's changed a little bit from that. So when it comes down to a Declan Doyle and a Ben Johnson, also general manager is only 38, 39 years old too. So there's a lot of youngness in Chicago right now, which I think is good, because I think for so long it was this old school, everything was defense. Everything was like, we have to stick to the Hallis ways, which look, I love George Hallis and I love the history of the Bears and you love the 85 Bears and how everything was, but we're in this time now where things are changing. And when it comes to the passing game, when it comes to the importance of a quarterback, when it comes to the importance of an offensive line and how that plays into your running backs and things like that, we're seeing this like resurgence of the running back, which I love.
Thank goodness. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
I love so much. So I'm fascinated to see what somebody like Ben Johnson does with I don't know if he loves DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson, or if he's going to want them to go grab somebody else this offseason. But I do love what he did with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. And a lot of that is the offensive line. And I know you guys have a lot of experience in New Orleans with that too, of how you're building a run game, and you have a guy like Alvin Kamara, but there's only so much you can do with an Alvin Kamara if you don't have an offensive line to help.
Yeah, that becomes a huge part. And the other part of it too is having the counterpunch, right? Alvin Kamara's best days came when there was a second running back that he was able to work with. Now, up until this past year, where Clint Kubiak and the Shanahan system, the wide zone system, put him out in space, allowed him to do all the great things that he did. But then, you look back and it was really those 2 years that he had with Mark Ingram, 2017, 2018, followed by the 2 years that he had with Latavius Murray, 2019, 2020. Like, those were some of his best years because there was the punch counterpunch. You saw that with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs as well. So expect to see a little bit of that sort of same approach of, we called it boom and zoom here, thunder and lightning, like however it is that you want to do, however it is that you want to look at it. The one speedy, athletic scat back that's a game changer and a pace changer, along with the bruiser that can get outside, that can catch the football, but that can do a lot of work in the middle of the offense. That's what was expected when the Saints signed Jamal Williams, but then they turned Jamal Williams into a fullback for the last 2 years, and now he's probably not going to be back, and I don't blame him. And so I think that's the other thing you're looking for too, is when you look at what that partnership is, or that pairing is, what's the tandem end up looking like by the time that you get to week one? Be interesting to see if it remains or if it does undergo some changes there.
Yeah, a couple more. It is always fun to see all these connections, because you were just mentioning, obviously, Sean Payton was the one that brought in Declan Doyle, you said. And then, so there's all these connections now that as you're seeing, and Sean Payton obviously liked him enough to want to bring him with him to Denver. And then now we're seeing Ben Johnson start to pluck some of this staff from that time with the Saints, and when the overlap between Sean Payton and then obviously when Dennis Allen took over. But those are always so fun when you go back and you see the coaching trees and the coaching just connections all over the league. It's fascinating to watch that. And this last year, to your point, with Shane Waldron, I joked about it because I was like, we got, number one, the wrong McVay branch. We did not get the right off of there. But also there was all these weird connections because he was in the Rams with the Rams, and there was like overlap with Zach Taylor, who obviously hit the Bengals outside of Joe Burrow, were struggling, and then Press Taylor was struggling in Jacksonville. And there was all these, I was like, we got the wrong branch on this we get the right branch. But Ross, final one before I let you go, because this is just more of a personal favorite player in the league who was on the Saints for a while. He's a free agent this year. There's rumors of what the Bears will do at backup quarterback, because Tyson Bagent's a young guy. Are they going to go with that? Or are they going to go get a veteran guy like a Jameis Winston?
Yes.
And Jameis Winston is one of my favorite people. We obviously down here in Jacksonville, we also cover the Seminoles very closely too. But just tell me, like, do you have any your fun experience with Jameis? Like, is Jameis what we see in these videos? Just that's who he is.
That's 100% who he is. Now I will say this: when he's on the podium and he's the starting quarterback and everything like that, he buttons up, he does the quarterback stuff. Like that's he plays the game a little bit in that way. But he is genuine, authentic. He is 100% Jameis, and it's awesome. It's awesome all the time. He's had some of the clips from his press conferences and stuff like over here got picked up. He had that moment where he tried to run through the little gauntlet and then it knocked him down and all that kind of stuff. Like that's just who he is. In fact, he's going to be here in New Orleans during the Super Bowl doing like man on the street stuff for one of our local TV stations and everything. Like he's just, I'm so excited. And the people in New Orleans are going to eat that up. They're going to be so excited. Everybody loves Jameis.
I love it.
And look, he knows. Like he knows DA well, he knows Dennis Allen well, he knows Declan Doyle very well also. And so like there's going to be that connective tissue that could potentially bring him there to Chicago. And for a guy like Caleb Williams to have somebody behind him like Jameis, that is just going to be like, Jameis is never going to be the veteran backup that's waiting for the young rookie to fail. He's always going to be the veteran backup that wants to see the young buck succeed and will do everything that he can to help him. And that means staying on the field with him after practice, talking to him on the phone, chopping it up after practices, getting, outside of the facility, like getting together to go over film and all this stuff. Incredibly smart player. He doesn't get credit for that. But there's like all these little pieces to who Jameis is. And that would be such a good fit for him to land there in a place where the expectation doesn't have to be for him that he'll eventually get out on the field, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody wants to see Caleb Williams succeed. That's a better situation and was not the situation in Cleveland.
Definitely.
Where people would have rather see Jameis from week one, right? From right away. And so
me.
A great spot. Yeah, right. A great spot that he could potentially land that will allow him to be his most authentic self, help a guy like Caleb Williams, and not put the pressure on him that he doesn't have to have. Like he's just there to be a good dude and a good teammate. And he's somebody that you talk about culture, locker room. Everybody loves Jameis. And I'm not ripping off the TV show. I just mean it. Like it doesn't matter if you're the fifth, linebacker on the practice squad. Jameis knows you, your name, what you do, where you're from, who your mama is. Like he knows all that and everything. And so like that's so kind of like Declan in terms of having that connectivity. Jameis is the type of dude that can bring an entire locker room together.
Yeah, and like I said, I love him as a player. We did the show I host is called Helmets and Heels, and one Friday was after that snow game that they just had in Cleveland, and he was just talking about it. There were so many good clips from that, but we did a whole day where every time we came back from a break, we just played one of the famous Jameis clips, and it was fantastic. There was the one, I want to say it might have been in New Orleans, where they were like in the huddle, and someone's making a speech, and they're like, look to the person to your left, and he's just I love him so much. But so to your point, I do think somebody like that in the locker room, I could just see him and Caleb meshing really well too. I think people have this false perception of who Caleb is, and he's a fantastic. The more I've covered him this year, the more I've gotten to know him, the more I've seen him speak personally on just an emotional level. You really get to know that Caleb cares. Caleb's competitive as hell. He loves everybody on this team. He'll have everybody's back in a heartbeat. He'll blame himself before anybody else. And I do think that Jameis and that light, they would mesh so well. I could just see Caleb Williams like busting out laughing at certain things that Jameis says, because there was this one clip where I think it was on Bart, like when Big Cat, and he made a comment. He was like, look, if you could sacrifice one Bears fan to win 10 Super Bowls, like would you push the button? And Caleb kind of like hesitates, and then Big Cat was like, I'll be the sacrifice. And Caleb just busts out laughing. And he's like, what? He's like, you guys are insane. And he was like, no, that's Chicago fans. Like we will sacrifice ourselves. And it's so just that emotion. I was like, I could picture him just laughing at Jameis all along, but it'll be really fun. I'm excited. Like when I saw he was going to be kind of like at the Super Bowl in some way, I was like, this is great. I can't wait to see what he does. And I know it's just this personality, and talk about a redeemer. I always say he has the best character arc of any person, from everything that kind of happened at Florida State and then who he is now. It's like the best character arc of any player ever when it comes.
Yeah, usually we see it go the other way. Right?
But again, I really appreciate it, Ross. This is some really good stuff. I know people will be excited about all of this, especially the Declan stuff, because I do think that was one of the ones where people just didn't really know. And if you don't know, you don't know what to expect. So hearing some good stuff about that, and Dennis taking away the head coaching, take off that head coaching hat and be the DC that we all know you can be. But I hope you have a good rest of your week. Enjoy the Super Bowl next weekend. I know the city will be crazy, so have fun and have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Right back at you. Appreciate you for having me on. You take care, stay safe, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you. You too.
So now we're pivoting over to some of the staff that him and Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren have now started to build. And that brings me to today's episode, which is talking about Al Harris. Obviously, the Bears signed him. Now he is the defensive back coach and defensive pass game coordinator for the Bears, and I am joined by Mickey Spagnola. He is a columnist over at DallasCowboys.com. So, Mickey, I really appreciate you hopping on and sharing what you do know about Al Harris and his time with the Cowboys.
Yeah, sure. I hope I can help you out.
Yeah, we're obviously it's an exciting time for Chicago because it's the talk around Ben Johnson and this offensive mind and being able to kind of mold and form Caleb Williams, hopefully help develop him into a quarterback that a lot of people believe he can be. But the defensive side of the ball, Mickey, has been what the Chicago Bears are. This is what you know. If you're a Bears fan, you love running the ball and you love the defense because those are two things that they've had. So let's talk about Al Harris. Obviously, he's been with Dallas since 2020. He was the defensive backs coach that year. Last year, also coached the defensive backs, but was an assistant head coach too. So let's just talk about His time there, the Dallas Cowboys, that defense, what would you say has been the MO of the Dallas Cowboys defense the last few years?
Well, I think he's done a really good job of helping to develop the young cornerbacks. Obviously that's what he played. He's coached for quite a while, and he ended up with some talent. So first he had Trayvon Diggs, who in his second year ended up with 11 interceptions. Now, I don't know how much coaching has to do with that. He was pretty talented, right? Second-round pick. But again, he was the guy in charge of the secondary at that time. And if you recall, the 11 interceptions he had tied the most by an NFL player since 1981, when Everson Walls of the Cowboys had 11 interceptions. So no one's had more than those two guys with 11 interceptions in all the almost 40 some years, right? So he did that, and then a couple of years later, Deron Bland ended up coming to the Cowboys as a fifth-round draft choice. And when Diggs got hurt in 2023, Bland ended up with 9 interceptions and 5 returned for touchdowns. So he helped develop some really young guys. I thought he was really hands-on with some young guys that bringing them along, and maybe no more so than this past year when Bland missed the first, I want to say, 9-10 games, and then Trayvon Diggs missed the last 5, and he had to bring along some unknown, not only a rookie free agent, but another free agent to help with the secondary. So I think that he's done a good job of developing cornerbacks here with the Dallas Cowboys.
Which I think is something that Bears fans love to hear. We have the secondary, I think, is something that a lot of people are very confident in Chicago with the Jalen Johnson, Kyler Gordon at that nickel corner, and then even across, Tyreek Stevenson has had some ups and downs, so I do think somebody like Al Harris will be good for him. The big play that everybody wants to talk about with Tyreek Stevenson, obviously, was the Hail Mary play. That was something that kind of was a moment where you saw maybe a lack of discipline when it comes to that secondary, because he was taunting fans, wasn't where he was supposed to be on the field. That led to Washington beating the Bears on a Hail Mary because Tyreek kind of spiked it up into the ball rather than batting it down. So personality-wise, if you're talking about Al Harris, would you explain his coaching type as you said, hands-on? Is he a more aggressive, loud type of coach? Because I've heard things like that with Ben Johnson. Or is he someone more of, you don't hear him as much?
Yeah, I don't know that he's kind of a boisterous yell and scream coach. I think it's a little bit more low key, but I think that he gets his message across to these cornerbacks. I think he had them playing hard, and I just think he with his knowledge, and I think the players end up respecting what he's done, not only in his coaching career, but his playing career. They know he's done this, that he's played at a high level, and I think that gets the guys' attention. But I think he's also a very good communicator. Just watching him on the sideline, working with the guys like pre-games in their warm-ups and things like that, and as little as we get to watch in practice, I think he commands their attention.
We did have a little bit of a swap. Obviously, Al Harris coming to Chicago and Matt Eberflus making his way to be defensive coordinator in Dallas. I will tell you, Mickey, I'm a big fan of Matt Eberflus. I think that when it comes to a defense, he's very, very good at a lot of things, and we saw that fall off drastically when he got fired this last year. The defense took a massive step down, the opposite direction of what you would hope they would be. But he did have his hits mentality. That was kind of the acronym he used, and the broke down the T for that hits was the ball, and that was he was very focused on turnovers and was very focused on, obviously, the peanut punch, getting that ball out, ball hawk type mentality. So I think we do have players that fit that scheme. And to your point, when you're talking about a Trayvon Diggs and a Deron Bland, I think Bland we talked about a ton because of the pick sixes. But to your point, having a defensive back coach who is kind of focused on making sure you are forcing some of those turnovers. Obviously, you have to execute, but it is a big part in a lot of defenses now. We say that stat of, you know, the people that win the turnover battle are usually the ones winning the football games.
Yeah, just look at the playoffs, right? And by the way, you know, we go way back with Matt Eberflus. He came here as a linebacker coach and then became the defensive pass game coordinator before he went on to the Colts. And as a matter of fact, I knew about him going back to when he was in college. I went to the University of Missouri, and he was a linebackers coach there. The 2 years they went to the Big 12 championship game, unfortunately lost to Oklahoma both times. So I've been around Matt for quite some time, and yeah, it's a really good deal that the Cowboys were able to get here. I don't know, and I think Al had the chance to go to the Bears maybe before the Cowboys made their decision on a head coach. And again, you know, I'm sure what his thinking was is I'm going to where a head coach, I'm guessing, signed a 5-year deal. And so he's got, you know, some length to his stay there regardless of what happens. So, yeah, you know, and here's the deal. When you hire like an offensive-minded head coach, probably the coordinator, he's at the mercy of his defense because he probably can't fix it. So the fact that Al had been the Cowboys' assistant head coach this last year and taking care of the secondary will help out on the defensive side of the ball. That a offensive-minded head coach really needs the help on the defense, because chances are if things are struggling over there, you know, he's not going to be able to fix it. He's going to rely on his defensive coordinator and anybody on that defensive side of the ball that has some extensive NFL experience that Al Harris has.
From your experience, Mickey, because something we've seen a lot, and we've talked about this a ton in Chicago, of kind of this morphing that we're seeing of defenses, and especially with linebackers. Now, I know he is specifically the defensive back coach, but we're seeing a lot more athletic, slimmer, fast linebackers because they're dropping back into coverage a lot, and we're seeing a lot of those sort of things. Do you see defensive back coaches kind of going over and helping those position groups at all?
Well, I think that there's a little bit of a carryover because, like the last couple years, especially when Dan Quinn was here, he was taking some larger size safeties and putting them in as linebackers. So it was like, you know, big DBs, but they were actually playing close to the line of scrimmage, you know, kind of moonlighting as a linebacker. So, yeah, and I think that's what teams are looking for right now. And, you know, I could use the example of the Cowboys when they used a third-round draft choice on DeMarvion Overshown that looked like he was built like a kind of a big, tall safety, but playing linebacker, and had the safety skills, but yet at, well, I'm going to guess 6'3", 235, had the size of an outside linebacker with the ability to play in coverage. And I think you're exactly right. You know, you still want the middle linebacker to be, you know, sort of not in that old mode of a guy that's, 6'3", 260, because the Cowboys were pretty successful with Eric Kendricks this year, and he was a smaller type middle linebacker, but with a lot of speed and a lot of ability with recognition to know where to go and when to be there. So, yeah, I think the speed at linebacker has changed, especially with you know, the advent of the passing game picking up, teams using 3-4 wide receivers. You've got to have some versatile linebackers on the field.
Yeah, it's been really fun to watch that, just because I do think it's shifted the way teams are drafting, to your point, because they're looking at a lot of different things. We talked the hot topic this last year was the two high safeties and what that is doing to offenses and how it's changing things. So it will be fun to kind of see the rest of this mold, but having a position coach that can kind of do a little bit of everything and has experience with different players is obviously good. There's one thing we'll probably have to get Al Harris. He was played for the Green Bay Packers for 7 years, so we'll have to kind of get him on board of not liking the Packers, I think, when he's in Chicago, but we'll see how that goes. Mickey, just a couple more for you before I let you go. We're talking about that defensive back label, but also the label now that we're seeing a little bit more, I think, these last few years, and that's the defensive pass game coordinator. We hear the passing game coordinator a lot on the offensive side of the ball, and now we're seeing this title more and more throughout the league. Is that something even more specific for a coach when they're also labeled with that title?
Well, I think when you, with teams playing so much nickel defense these days, I think your secondary coaches, at times get that title. Now, a lot of times what you're doing is trying to give them an upgraded title to not either try to hire a guy or try to keep a guy that's other teams are looking at, right? And that was, I'm guessing, one of the reasons why when Mike McCarthy made Al Harris assistant head coach, there were teams trying to hire him, and it's like, okay, well, I'm guessing one of these days you want to be a head coach, so this title might help attract attention. So I think that has a little bit to do with it also, just to have more than just a position coach title, that you're taking care of the passing game. Because, by the way, when the Cowboys, I think it was Matt Eberflus's last 2 years here, he was the defensive passing game coordinator for the Cowboys also.
Okay. That honestly makes a lot of sense. It's something, like I said, that he's started the development of a lot of these young guys, and so now to get somebody who can kind of continue that on, that I feel like can do it at a high level, is fun. Final one before I let you go, because we're getting close, about a little over a month away from free agency. So this is when we start to talk about, okay, what are some of these positions that need filled that you can go to free agency first before you start to address the draft. Some of the Cowboys names that stick out to me that are available 2025 free agents. Obviously this can change any time as we start talking about contracts, but a Zach Martin, a DeMarcus Lawrence, a Brandon Cooks, any of those names you see taking on free agency, you see those guys back with you guys, or any names that stick out to you?
Well, I think when it comes to Lawrence and Zach Martin, I think it's going to come down to, and remember, both of the guys finished the season on injured reserve. They've both played now 11 years in the NFL. They're, as you mentioned, they're both becoming unrestricted free agents. So I think the question, more so than can I keep them or can I afford them, is do they want to continue to play?
Yeah.
When you put in that many years and then you finish this last season injured, do you want to try to make a comeback? And Zach Martin had, if he wants to play, believe me, the Cowboys will try to get him back here. Because if he's here or not here, because of the restructure bonuses they've signed to him, he's going to cost $17 million against the salary cap for the Cowboys, regardless if he plays or not. Their preference would be, oh, come on back, let's play another year or two. But does he want to? And I think the same thing goes for DeMarcus Lawrence because of the restructured contracts that he signed. He's going to count $8 million in 2025 in dead money if he's not here. Now, if he's here, you can spread that out a little bit. But again, I can remember, I'm guessing it was around Thanksgiving or so when, and DeMarcus Lawrence didn't talk about it a lot. Like, are you going to continue to play? Do you want to play? And at one point somebody asked him, well, do you want to come back next year? And he kind of made a curt answer. Well, that depends how much they want to pay me. So I don't know if he was joking or if there was a little bit of truth in the humor. because again, when you've played that long and you're going to come back and play again, you're probably not playing for a discount, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's going to have to financially give you some incentive to come back and try to play another year or two. So, yeah, the Cowboys have to, see where that one goes. And, with Brandon Cooks, I'm sure they'd love to have him back. But again, we're talking another guy 10 years in the league. Does he want to continue to play, and how much would somebody pay him to sign him as an unrestricted free agent? Because, as we know here very well, the Cowboys will still have salary cap problems this coming season.
Yeah, that's one thing that fortunately the Bears do not have to worry about. That Ryan Poles has been able to get them in a very good spot when it comes to that. It's the Cowboys are also familiar with players retiring and coming back. That was I know Jason Witten did that, so we'll see how some of these other guys go into. But Mickey, I really appreciate you hopping on with me. Like I said, I know this is a really exciting time for a lot of Bears fans, so they're taking anything they can to get to know some of these coaches because a clean slate is what I feel like I think the organization need, players need. I appreciate Coach Dave Campo because he's the one who got me your contact, and Campo's a fantastic person, so I appreciate you.
Camps is the best, and Taylor, I enjoyed being with you, and anytime I can help you out, give me a call.
Thank you so much, Mickey, and you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.